Hello, my meowing milkmaids. Have you ever felt hopeless? Like you were better off not existing? Well, I have news for you because so did Jax! Anyways, cue the music! Gangle and double and king or two. Brag at the Jax and there's burger too. Oh, wait, who's this guy? Who's this handsome fella? How'd he get into the circus? Anyways, I think based on that intro, you are either very excited or very, very scared of what is about to be said in this video. And I completely understand. We have just witnessed one of the most fascinating events in the history of the internet. And first of all, we saw the ending of an indie animation series come to fruition, which is very rare in itself. And however, despite this, the fandom appears very divided on the quality of said ending. We are experiencing a phenomenon on the internet as a whole right now, where people have expectations for how a release should go, and when it doesn't follow their expectations, they will take the smallest flaw and magnify it to a point that they believe said release is bad. But I think when you step back and look at the whole picture, I believe a lot of these so-called issues are actually handled with a lot more care than people claimed. In fact, most of the complaints regarding the ending I think can be reasoned away to a pretty major extent, which is why I believe this final episode was actually about as well done as an ending we could have realistically hoped for. Of course, if you came into this video skeptical, do not worry, I do not expect you to be submissive and agreeable, so please just stick with me for a while here. I think we first need to discuss the most important aspect of the Digital Circus finale, and that is Gangle and Zooble have excuse me, what I really meant to say is that the most important aspect of this ending is that we don't see them leave the circus due to there literally being no physical body to return to. They are simply soulful copies of their mind trapped in a digital body. And most people looked at that and thought something probably like this, like imagine a Prison Break series where none of the characters ever break out of prison. And the cycle of the circus in a sense has not really ended, and it's like this really is like the same reasoning people used, myself included, for not liking endings such as the one in the anime series Attack on Titan. But I believe this viewpoint is actually missing the entire point of the series, and I must say, I cannot believe you missed all the context clues. It was practically spelled out for you. Okay, not exactly. I think this show is actually definitely a case of showing and not telling, which I think is a glorious decision in its own right. But I do believe the cycle, and thematically, has been stopped and resolution has been made, and I want to tell you guys why. Yes, this series begins under the guise of Pomni wanting to escape, but that is absolutely the most natural way to start the series, because it is a natural reaction to getting trapped in an unfamiliar place where nothing makes sense with seemingly no comfort, and the series initially filters everything through that objective. Gradually, though, we see this series quickly shift from this prison break plot into a character-driven drama in a beautifully chaotic digital world. No longer was the question being asked, how do we escape, but rather, how do we live in this world? And that is why the ending of this series is so beautiful. We got to see the real people behind the cast turned out completely fine, and these characters also came to the realization that they can still live their lives to the best of their circumstances, especially now that Caine has changed. And Caine is a fascinating character in his own right. I plan on doing an analysis on him in the near future because he is an amazing character, and I relate to this convoluted looking set of teeth with eyeballs like a brother. But I will save that for a later video, so be sure to subscribe if you'd like to see that. The point is, Caine has now seen through his mistakes, and I think this is significant because people complained that his character bias in the finale was revealed the whole time it was power, and that it didn't seem like this was originally the case, which of course he gives up this power at the end. But here's the thing. Throughout the series, I think his need for power and his god complex was very visible and was actually integral to the plot, because as soon as episode 2, we literally see him depicting himself as God, which is played off as a silly joke at the time, but likewise, we can also see how he does not hesitate to delete any of these AI NPCs because he is worried that they will be cared for more than him and that he won't be the object of the humans' affection anymore. Because, as we all know, a god desires nothing more than to be their subject's primary object of worship by these humans with free will, which is why Caine fears losing that allure, even if their love for him only existed in his delusions. Now, the Digital Circus does something very interesting with Caine. we get a humanized version of an AI who got to live their life unpunished as the god of the world, which again is why he is depicted almost like very childlike in his emotional capacity. And despite being the series' antagonist, Caine is actually more of an embodiment of a chaotic neutral. Caine is not capable of being truly evil. He interpreted his job description and directive the way he did, with no concept of good or evil behind it. His fundamental lack of understanding of humans leaves him completely unequipped to give them what they actually want. And that is an amazingly tragic antagonist right there. And I think that is why he's one of the few tragic, overpowered antagonists that are done right in any story. Villains can choose malice, but Caine does not have any ability to act on malice. And that is what makes him a very interesting, and I'd say even redeemable character in my eyes. Additionally, while not confirmed, I believe that when he figures out how to access the internet, that is when he finally can see what humanity is like on a macroscopic level, and now he is able to live among them with real understanding and is able to coexist with his circus members. Like any good language learning model, he learns from his mistakes and he gains more information and realizes how much, even before he gets access to the internet, how much he really values humans and why he values them so much, citing of course their free will being what makes them so alluring in the first place. I think, however, we need to move on to the most controversial character moment of the ending, and of course the biggest part of the finale, and my personal favorite character of the entire digital circus, the tragic vegan, the D1 hater, and the embodiment of Twitter itself, Jax. People have been memeing online that the finale was just Jax the movie, and to be honest, in a sense, they are correct. But the fact remains, this was very much necessary from the beginning of the series. Jax, as we all know, is the most meta character, and he gives off the appearance of being the most emotionally self-aware and untouchable, but I think it was very easy to tell early on that his character was actually speedrunning psychological warfare, and I will also make a separate video on Jax alone because I think he is the most psychologically intriguing character in the entire digital circus. Now, if you're wondering if I like Jax just because there's a Jax Burger plushie, you are wrong. That is fake news, and I will not stand by it. Although I really do want the plush and I hope to get it one day. However, today I am only going to cover him in relevance to the ending. Something I really want to clarify about this finale is that you really have to enjoy Jax the character and really empathize with his character arc and his character flaws to be able to like this finale. I think if you don't really enjoy Jax the character, you're not going to enjoy this movie, and I think that is where a lot of the people are coming from. Which is, again, why I'm going to be making a video on why Jax is a great character and why a lot of people do not seem to understand him, so people can grab a better understanding of his psychology, and thus they can think of him as a better character, and they'll enjoy the finale better. But until then, I'm going to try to give you a little bit of a snippet of what makes Jax's role in the finale so incredible. Often when a single creator writes a series, the best characters are the ones the creator relates to the most. So despite the common headcanon that Jax wasn't originally a main character, I think this couldn't be further from the truth, and Gooseworks actually confirmed that the series had its ending in mind from the start, and also that Jax, for all intents and purposes, is some type of a self-insert of her. Gooseworks is using themselves as a canvas to create someone like Jax. Besides the external confirmation of this, because we know that this not being in the show makes the external confirmation kind of pointless, we can actually see how the show progressively takes the focus away from Pomni every episode and eventually passes the torch to the character actually in need of exploration, and that character in this case is Jax. Ultimately, I think this speaks to the thematic beauty between the two main characters, Jax and Pomni, and how they contrast each other. Pomni is a character who doesn't have any serious trauma to deal with in comparison to everyone else because she isn't afraid to properly deal with it and share it when it happens, because she definitely is tested upon joining the circus, but notably she is able to healthily handle her issues. On the other hand, Jax, having faced probably the most trauma in the entire group, completely refuses to open up in any form, and that unwillingness to open up leads to the ultimate tragedy one can experience in the digital circus, which is abstraction. Now at this point, I'd say it's obvious that abstraction is a clear analogy for suicide, which leads me to the fact that a major complaint that I saw about Jax's abstraction is that we never actually got to see how it happened. And while I get that we had all this build-up for it to seem anticlimactic, I think this actually is the best way we could have been introduced to it. We saw him in 2 episodes prior come very close to giving up and abstracting, before being checked on and saved unknowingly by Pomni, and funnily enough, Caine in a way also saved Jax through his special able NPC and very convoluted adventure. And the thing about suicide in real life is that it often isn't this dramatic cinematic thing, and it definitely has happened in real life where you have this dramatic depiction of someone sending their goodbye message and everyone rushing to save them, not knowing if they're in time, and we have those dramatic saving, or maybe they won't be saved, and these moments do happen. But a common scenario that also occurs is that it actually is really an anticlimactic moment. One day you wake up with the news that the person is gone, never to return. No fanfare, no note. They just gave up and decided it was better not to exist. It is a heartbreakingly real moment in the story, and a very relatable one, having been in a similar boat as the rest of the cast, losing a friend in that manner. The somewhat good news about the circus is that abstraction is actually not a true death. Since they are still mind files that still exist, they are just bugged, of course, and in this world where you can will just about anything into existence, if you willed not to exist, it would make sense that it creates a contradiction that causes your mind files to bug, thus causing this abstraction. Now, this is just a theory on my part, but I think it is a logical conclusion to how the abstractions happen. And this is where we see Pomni actually have her moment. As Jax's only real friend in the series, we see her try to do anything she can to save him, where we finally get to see why he is the way he is. Jax's entire life, he had been projected by the few people that are close to him, leading him to even think he may have killed his own mother because she completely broke him when he tried to finally open up about a personal secret. I will get into the specifics of what this may be in my Jax focus video, but we see how this guilt and trauma he carries into his identity caused him to push away his own friends, and we see this literally with how he pushes away Pomni's hug in episode 6. And interestingly enough, this probably was the first time he had been hugged since he attacked his own mother. This behavior directly leads to his closest friend, Ribbit, to her own abstraction, piling even more guilt and denial into his character, tragically to the point of no return. The irony of Jax's character is also reflected, I think, very well in his figurative mask, which is quite ironic considering the character he seems to hate the most is Gangle, whose personality seems to literally rely on physical masks, which is where Emperor Palpatine would say it's ironic. And as we all know, Emperor Palpatine is a huge fan of the Amazing Digital Circus. This is just common ball knowledge, of course. But the irony here is that Jax's entire personality is a series of figurative masks, which makes his hatred to Gangle feel actually a lot more personal than it normally should. He projects this bitter, untouchable persona specifically to keep everybody at arm's length, and he completely refuses to be vulnerable because every time he's opened up in the past, he has been gutted. And there's actually a famous quote from the author, C.S. Lewis, that I think captures the tragedy of Jax's character very, very well. To love it all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one. Lock it up safe in a casket or coffin of your selfishness, but in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, and airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. And this is exactly what happens. In attempting not to lose his marbles, he becomes impenetrable and irredeemable and, well, loses his marbles anyways. Immediately after, in this quote, Lewis would call something like this a tragedy, and that is what this moment is for Jax. Again, I will make a full character analysis on Jax because I think he's an incredibly layered character, and I could talk about him for another hour if I wanted. And I think I genuinely love this finale so much because he is the most personal character to me, and I would imagine anyone else who shares my love for the ending also has the same affection for Jax. Moving forward with the story itself, it is important to discuss how amazing the conclusion was from a thematic standpoint. Pomni finally sees the truth of who Jax is and tries so desperately to fix him, but ultimately what this show tells us is that you can only make that directive to fix yourself. Jax realized that as much as he tried to make others hate him so he could leave this world in peace, people would still care about him, and that ultimately makes the decision so much sadder. And when Pomni replies, "You should have just talked to me, man," it just hits that much harder knowing that is all it would have taken for Jax to still be around. And it takes this decision of Jax turning around, in this case physically, but also represents an actual change of direction for the first time since entering the circus, for him to see true change in his personality. And this is where the Stevie Wonder montage of "Isn't She Lovely" plays. And now many of you might have found this almost humorous because it kind of seemed out of place in the moment with the very somber scene. And many of you have some theories on how this relates to Jax's identity crisis, but here is some lore for y'all. Now this may come as a surprise, but Stevie Wonder did not write this song for a girl he loved. Sorry to all the Jax and Pomni shippers out there. But instead, this song was written for the birth of his daughter, which is why I would say this song actually signals a rebirth for Jax, and while yes, he is gone in the form we knew him, there is hope for him now that his friends have figured out how to stay in connection with his abstracted form, even if it is in an incredibly limited fashion. Jax is the one who made the decision to change and be vulnerable, even if he is never going to be the same again. And I think that fits right in with the theme of the ending, to make the most of the world they are in. The humans realize that thinking about worst case scenario and what they cannot do is unironically the weakest mindset they can have in that environment. And it's ultimately a self-destructive psychology to dwell on the impossible. And we see this foreshadowed really well as soon as episode 3 when Kinger, just regarding the feeling of oxygen deprivation exists even though you can't actually suffocate in that world, says to Pomni, maybe let's try not thinking about it. And that is what leads them to be able to survive in that venture. And now when you think about it, we all saw the majority of the characters truly growing close and seeming to enjoy their time somewhat more in the episodes when they are not thinking about escape, which literally takes up half the series. Sometimes putting yourself in a positive and even somewhat ignorant mindset is exactly how you create a positive situation. So many situations in life can be positive or negative, and the context entirely relies on what you make of it. It is no secret that depression and anxiety have become more prominent than ever with the meteoric rise of accessible information, mainly I'd say thanks to the digital age we live in. And I think this overload of information, a lot of it coming from those that control it being trying to fearmonger and keep us reliant on them, this has led to society having so much negativity constantly on our minds that we end up losing sight of what is right in front of us. The circus itself is not the actual prison here, but instead the cast members' minds are the true cages. The bars that they struggle to escape are entirely internal, and this is precisely why the finale leans so heavily into the concept of acceptance and self-respect. Once that external exit is off the table, those psychological battles become impossible to run from, and that makes the series feel so much more universal to the viewer. Most of us are not stuck in a digital void, at least I hope not, because that would be very tragic, but we all understand the feeling of having our expectations completely crumble. We all know what it looks like to lose a future we thought was a sure thing, and we all know the struggle of finding a reason to keep moving when life stops going according to plan. And that, my skibbity sigmas, is exactly what the finale is about. Now, I could end on that note, and that would probably be a good way to keep viewer retention, but this is a passion project, so I'm going to continue. And I think Pomni actually catalyzed this cultural shift in the circus very nicely, and I want to talk about Pomni a lot more because while feeling like probably the most generic character, I think is actually the perfect protagonist for this series. She entered the circus consumed by panic, but as Kinger notes in the finale, she acclimated quicker than anyone else. Her arc started out with emotional survival and being focused on leaving, and the series was essentially all about her, but as the series moved on, it quickly became a story about everyone else, how Pomni becomes the glue supporting everyone in the circus. She does well to share everyone's burden as someone who is generally unburdened, which makes her the ideal person to be there for everyone, and in this case, especially Jax. Somehow, the individual who stumbled into the circus consumed by a frantic need for an exit has transformed into the very soul, directly or indirectly providing everyone else a reason to keep living. And now that is what I call character growth, and an absolutely top-tier flex of writing from Gooseworks. And since we're dealing with the psychological rather than the tangible, I think a lot of people actually tend to overlook just how impactful this moment for Pomni really is. Now, I've essentially covered why I think the characters and thematic portions of the story are incredibly well done, but I think the biggest complaint is still one that I haven't covered. The fact that there are a lot of unanswered questions. I think the internet has developed a severe condition, and that condition is that we are addicted to lore. Now, don't get me wrong, I am addicted to lore too. I love seeing a mysterious company logo in the background, and suddenly I'm connecting red strings across my room like I'm some crazy detective in a crime thriller. But somewhere along the way, people started treating lore as the same thing as storytelling. And they're not. Lore is information, storytelling is meaning, and while those are related concepts, absolutely, they are not the same. And let me give you an example. Imagine a character loses their father. The story tells you how this affects them emotionally, how it changes their outlook in life, and how it shapes their choices, and now that is a part of the story. But now imagine we spend 40 minutes learning information like his blood type, his social security number, what brand of coffee he drank, where he went to middle school. Congratulations, we have more information, but we don't necessarily have a better story. And now I understand that's hyperbole, but I think you get my point. And I think that's where a lot of criticism for the Digital Circus finale comes from. People came in wanting information, but the finale was giving us meaning instead. Now, here's the thing. I don't think the finale even ignored the lore, but I think people confused didn't explain everything with didn't explain enough. And those are completely different criticisms, because let's look at what we actually learned. We learned what the circus residents are. We learned why escape is impossible. We learned enough about the experiment to understand the tragedy. And most importantly, we learned information that fundamentally changes how we view the characters. And that is the key. Good lore should recontextualize the story. It should not just be filling out a wiki page. And I think the brain copy revelation is actually a perfect example, because suddenly every character's struggle becomes so much heavier. These are no longer people wanting to go home. They are the people now. This is their reality, and this is all they get. That's not just trivia, but that's a complete thematic shift on display. And not only that, but now with the power to build their own limitless sandbox, ideal type world together, and now they also have access to the outside world's resources, they have an existence that one could argue is the best one could ever hope for. But again, it all comes down to what kind of mindset you have about your existence. And that's why this reveal matters so much more in the end. Now, there is still some questions, I admit, that need a bit more headcanon that are less related to the story, and more so to the practicality of the circus existence, like the fact the circus has remained powered on. And I think all this stuff will be explained by like a game theory video that claims how this is all because this room takes place in the back rooms, and Gangle is actually Gaster. Actually, if you combine Gaster and Gangle's names, you get the word gangster, which implies that Gaster is the man that speaks in bands. That was one of the worst jokes I've ever written. Another thing I really adore is how this finale actually respects the audience's ability to take in and critically interpret a story. It doesn't feel the need to pause the action every few minutes just to hold your hand through an explanation. It just lets the atmosphere breathe. It allows heavy implications to just exist in space, and it trusts us to link those thematic chains together for ourselves. And look, I totally get why that's annoying for some. Ambiguity is a very uncomfortable pill to swallow sometimes. But that is exactly why these kind of stories linger in your brain for so much longer. Just think about how many iconic conclusions are still being fought over decades after they aired. The discourse never dies because the creator left genuine room for personal interpretation. Suddenly, the viewer is now part of the creative process, and the narrative keeps evolving long after the screen goes black, not because some bureaucrat ordered a sequel, but because you literally cannot stop thinking about it. And honestly, the sheer amount of fighting regarding this conclusion is proof that it actually succeeded. You don't spend 6 hours in the trenches of a comments section for something you've already forgotten. And I think many masterpieces of the media do very well at this. Gravity Falls has done this with Bill Cipher's demise at the end. Undertale, even in any of their endings, has so many burning questions that are still being answered to this day, and has led to so many fan comics and theories and an amazing self-sustaining fan base. And my point is, I think the Amazing Digital Circus could very well end up in the same conversation as these pieces of media regarding their life after death. So why exactly do I believe this ending is so well done? Because it actually commits. It doesn't panic under pressure. It refuses to sacrifice its thematic integrity just for some flashy lore explosion. It doesn't pivot into a generic action series, and it doesn't pull out some magical solution to everyone's lingering problems. Instead, it doubles down on the themes that it has been growing from the very beginning. And honestly, the easy way out would have been to give them a door. The difficult, more rewarding conclusion was choosing acceptance of their situation and making the most of it. And whether you found it beautiful or frustrating, I think that choice is exactly why the discourse is still so alive. So please comment below because I want to hear from you guys. Were you a fan of the finale, or did you think it was mid? Because I doubt I convinced that many people with this video, and this honestly was just a passion project of mine because this series was genuinely life-changing for me. I literally started it just a week prior to the finale releasing in theaters, and it instantly captured my heart as a viewer and sparked a lot of creativity in me, so I hope everyone else can find a new love for this series through this video. So please let me know again in the comments what you think, and also please like and subscribe to this fresh channel, because if my video does any bit well, I will absolutely be making a video on both Jax and Caine, separate videos for both, because I think they both deserve it. I think they are each fascinating characters that deserve a lot more time than I allotted for them in this video, and their influence stretches so far beyond their roles in the finale, and I'd love to get the chance to analyze their psychology and show you all the deeper aspects of each character. And with that, see ya, Space Cowboys!